Hello, everyone. This is Colin once again. This is not a scheduled show. I had said on Twitter that I am really busy with my schedule, and I apologize for not having a episode of Dreaming in Symbols. I've been having a lot of schedule conflicts. This is a very busy semester for me at this point in time. But I wrote a blog post recently on my WordPress, aussiecda.wordpress.com, Dreaming in Symbols blog, and I talked about the concept of understanding and reading symbols, or not symbols, scripture, how important it is to understand the nuances in understanding sacred scripture. What happens if you only read the literal manifest text and don't dive into hermeneutics, whether it's different ways of understanding a text, different levels that different traditions have invented, like Judaism's 4 levels of sacred scripture. Islam has it as well, so does Christianity. And also reading commentary, whether it's biblical commentary, commentary on the Torah, commentary on the Quran. And I noticed a trend where Christian apologists, especially here on YouTube, are not consistent with this approach. When they are talking about the Quran in particular, and I have my copy here, the meaning of the Holy Quran by Abdul Yusuf Ali, when they are presenting uh, the text of the Quran, depending on what they're trying to argue at any given moment, they will tell their viewers and their audience the tafsir or the commentary. They will say, oh, well, some Muslims or tradition says this, or there's a Sirah episode or a Hadith episode that has to do with this verse. And then they go into it and they make their argument. That's excellent. That's great. But then I noticed that they're not consistent in doing that. So, for example, as I said in my blog post, when they are usually referencing like Surah 9, suddenly historical analysis, suddenly reference of commentary, reference of hadith just goes out the window. It's just, oh, the Quran says this, it commands Muslims to do this. And that's not really consistent. To me, that's not being scholarly. Now, when I did my blog post, I had said that I had been watching a number of videos of Christian apologists. I wasn't necessarily just thinking of David Wood or Sam Shimon or James White or anybody specifically when I was watching a host of videos, and I noticed this trend. But I just happened to stumble across a video by David Wood on the subject of Taqiyya. Had never seen it before. He uploaded it in 2015, so it's a more of a recent video in the grand scheme of things. And he illustrated my point in this 5-minute video. I'm not going to dissect the entire video. I'm just going to use this as an example of what I'm talking about. At the very beginning, he mentions 2 verses, and I have 2 tabs open right now. One of the tabs is his video, and I may play some of it, I may not. I don't have like the screen flow thing that James White does, although that does look pretty cool. I may invest in that. Quran chapter 16 verse 106 and Quran chapter 3 verse 28. Now, what he does in those 2 verses, he actually talks about the commentary, about tafsir, about hadith for both those verses. He tells us the historical context in which chapter 16 verse 106 was revealed, that if you are being tortured and you are forced to deny Islam, but in your heart you really didn't because you were being tortured, then Allah forgives you denying the religion. You're not an apostate if you're under torture and your torturers force you to say you're not a Muslim or to do things that are un-Islamic. So he gives us that context. Then he skips to 328. And he reads 328. And he has the text on the screen while he's reading it. And I found myself watching him and going, and not trying to sound like a complete jerk, but does David Wood not see what he's reading? Okay. And maybe I'm in error. So I'm not going to actually, I'm going to mute the video, but I'm going to go to the part that I'm talking about. Because he does this with both Ibn Kathir and Quran chapter 3 verse 28. He says, so he has it on the screen, let not the believers take disbelievers for their friends in preference to believers. Whoso doeth that hath no connection with the law, unless it be that ye but guard yourselves against them, taking as it were security. I'm not sure what translation he's using, but even if I just read along with him or listen to him reading the text, which he does in the video. His interpretation, David Wood's interpretation of the text, is fascinating. I'm on minute 2:03 of his video, What is Taqiyya? He essentially forms an argument by stating that this allows Muslims to deceive non-believers, that they are allowed to pretend to be friendly to non-believers. And later on in the video, he says, because they're not in a place where they can be dominant, right? So they are allowed to be deceptive towards non-believers. They can pretend to be friendly towards them, especially if they're in a minority or they, they fear for their own security, and so they have to play nice to non-Muslims. The thing is, the verse doesn't say that. Now, I'm going to read chapter 3, verse 28 from Abdul Yusuf Ali's translation, just I'm not sure what translation David Wood is using. He has the book in his hands. I just can't tell what it is. It might be Dawood's translation, potentially, which I do have a copy of that somewhere here in my library, but don't feel like trying to search for it. I don't see it. Actually, I do see it. It's right there. But I don't know. I don't know whether it's his. But I'll read it from Abdul Yusuf Ali. Let not the believers take for protectors unbelievers rather than believers. If any do that, in nothing will there be help from Allah except by way of precaution, that ye may guard yourselves from them. But Allah cautions you to remember himself, for the final goal is to Allah. Okay? Now I want to highlight something here. And I feel like I'm not splitting hairs by highlighting this. But in both translations, there is this one word that I think is really important that sort of gets skipped over by David Wood. In fact, he doesn't really mention it in his interpretation of the verse. Let not the believers take for protectors unbelievers rather. Okay, we can just, there's no period, but let's just stop. Rather than believers. What does that tell me? That the verse is saying, hey, believers, don't take for protectors unbelievers rather than believers. So in other words, don't go looking to become friends with unbelievers rather than believers. Okay, that to me is pretty obvious. To me, this has nothing to do with deception. But then it goes on to say, if any do that, and nothing will there be help from Allah. So in other words, if you make it your habit of making friends of unbelievers, protectors of unbelievers, rather than, or in his translation, David Wood's, in preference to other believers, then you'll have you'll have no help from Allah. The exception being, except by the way of precaution, or in his translation, to guard yourselves against them. Okay, so again, he ignores the first half of the text. He focuses on the whole part about security or guarding oneself, and he runs with this whole thing about deception. Oh, I'm gonna deceive the non-believers by being friendly towards them. I don't see the verse talking about that. Now, David Wood then goes on to quote Ibn Kathir. He says that Ibn Kathir is, I might play it here. Pull up the volume here. How he introduces Ibn Kathir. He says, let's play it here.
Tafsir of Ibn Kathir, chapter 3, verse 28 of the Quran.
Nah, hold on.
Tending to be friendly when you don't really want to be friendly. Let's read the most respected Muslim commentary in history.
The most respected Muslim commentary in history, and then he reads Ibn Kathir. I don't doubt that Ibn Kathir is a popular tafsir when it comes to English translations in its entirety. Tafsir of Ibn Kathir is one of those. I just Googled, I know, not scholarship, bad Aussie CDA. But I just sort of thought, hey, I wonder what people do think of Ibn Kathir, and found a Muslim website that actually said that the tafsir of Al-Tabari is considered to be probably the best. I don't have a dog to lose in this fight, as it were. I don't really, to me, it's not important which one's considered better than another. But for him to be like, oh, the best commentary, the best tafsir in Muslim history is Ibn Kathir, I wonder if Muslims actually agree with that. But anyway, don't want that to be a red herring. I just want to point that out. He introduces Ibn Kathir in that way. And again, he has the text on the screen. He's reading it. And he says, I'm on minute 229 now of his video. Allah prohibited his believing servants from becoming supporters of the disbelievers, or to take them as comrades with whom they develop friendships rather than believers. Okay. And I'm playing the video now. I have the volume really low, but that's the first part. It's going to continue here. Allah warned against such behavior when he said, and whoever does that will never be helped by Allah in any way, meaning whoever commits this act that Allah has prohibited, then Allah will discard him. Okay, now, again, why does David Wood not see in the text that he has typed up for his video, and what he's reading is the same thing the Quran says, rather than, okay, so and again, in preference to, rather than, that seems to be what the prohibition is having a preference to making friends or getting protectors from disbelievers over other believers. Now, David Wood's going to say the following, and I again will turn up the volume here, and because he's going to give his interpretation of what Ibn Kathir is saying.
Will discard a Muslim who has a Jewish or Christian or pagan friend. But we've already seen
He says at minute 254 around there that Allah will discard people, Muslims, who have Jews, Christians, or pagan friends. Where in the verse does it say that? Where? I don't see it. I don't see where he's getting that from, unless he's now harmonizing other verses, which would be ironic, which I could explain in a different video why that would be ironic, the actually allowing harmonization of Quranic verses. But it doesn't say that anywhere. It doesn't say, oh, if you've got a buddy who's a pagan, or a buddy who's a Christian, or a buddy who's a Jew, that Allah will discard you. Again, the verse is clearly saying, again, this idea of preference of taking unbelievers as protectors as opposed to believers, right? That there's a preference that you have, that you are doing this instead of, okay? Now, this just fits into his narrative, David Wood's narrative, of trying to suggest that Muslims will be discarded by Allah if they are friendly with unbelievers, and that they, in other words, when they pretend to be friendly, they're being deceptive. Because he goes on to then continue to quote Ibn Kathir, and I will turn.
Ibn Kathir continues,
I will turn it down, and he's saying there's an exception, unless you indeed fear a danger from them, meaning accept those believers who in some areas or times fear for their safety from the disbelievers. In this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship to the disbelievers outwardly, but never inwardly. So here's an example where Ibn Kathir is saying, okay, well, and it's with the Quranic text, that if you fear for your security, you can show friendship towards them in an outward way, but not inwardly. Then the tafsir will continue, because David Wood will continue to read it here. Let's skip ahead a little bit. I don't know if I skipped too far. This is minute 3. Okay, so then it continues. So after it says, unless, you're in an area where you fear for your security, then you can show them friendship to, for your security. Then Ibn Kathir says, for instance, Al-Bukhari reported that Abu ad-Darba said, we smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them. That's one. And then Al-Bukhari said that Al-Hasan said, Taqiyya is allowed into the day of resurrection. Okay. Again, he's got it on the screen, and again, I just have to ask, when Bukhari quotes Abu ad-Darba, we smile in the face of some people, but although our hearts curse them, what's the context of that tradition? I mean, of course, Ibn Kathir is putting this hadith, or this companion tradition, he's linking it to this verse. But I honestly want to know, what is the original context of that? What is this companion talking about? Is he really talking about that verse? When that verse was revealed, is that what inspired the companion to say that? What's the context of it? And then Al-Hasan says, Taqiyya is allowed into the day of resurrection. Okay, Taqiyya in what context? In this context? What context? I honestly want to know, because so all David Wood does with these two quotations is he says, Ibn Kathir is the best commentator, Bukhari is the best hadith collector, and then you've got Hassan and Abu ad-Darba, two companions, and he kind of puts them all together and he says, nah, here you go, Muslims can be deceptive and can pretend to be friends towards unbelievers. I'm just not seeing this based on what is being brought forward. Now, at this point in this video, I want to be very clear. I'm no longer a Muslim, okay? I'm not a Muslim anymore. So why am I doing this video? I'm doing this video because I still enjoy studying Islam. Very soon, I will be doing this academically. Okay. And does that make me an expert? No. Does that make me an expert now? No. Will it make me an expert then? No. The only thing I can hope for and pray for is that I will gain knowledge in my continued study of this religion. But I've got no dog to really lose in this fight. I would be making a video if I saw a Muslim apologist butchering and misusing Christian sources just the same way as I perceive David Wood is doing this. You better believe that I would be making this, making a almost identical video. The problem, as I stated in my blog, is that I think that at this point in our history, it's very dangerous to ignore or not to tell your audience about other ways in which this verse is interpreted, and to sort of come up with your own interpretation, or to sort of string along a bunch of sources and then just say, this is what this means, even though I'm not clearly seeing this verse saying this. Now, he'll go on later to say, oh, well, why might they do this? Why might Muslims, deceive or be deceptive in their friendship towards non-believers? And then he just sort of quotes a bunch of these fighting verses. Be harsh against the unbelievers. Fight the unbelievers. Chapter 9, verse 29. What doesn't he do when he's saying these other verses? He doesn't provide commentary. Why? Why not? And not just, why just the tafsir of Ibn Kathir? That's another problem I have. Why not all the other tafsirs? Even if his claim is that the tafsir of Ibn Kathir is the greatest commentary in Muslim history, based on who? And even if that were true, even if someone were to say this is the best commentary, there are other tafsirs. And when you look at other tafsirs online, and you can do this, this is why I'm amazed. Why don't people do this? Look up the other tafsirs on altafsir.com, I think it is, and you find that there are narratives. So, okay, Ibn Kathir quotes some narratives, right? He quotes some statements by some companions. Other tafsirs quote whole stories about historical circumstances in which this verse was revealed. Or there are 3 stories, from what I can tell, that contend that this is the reason why this verse was revealed. The historical context, was it like, oh, the Muslims were trying to deceive non-believers so that they could take them over later, as David Wood is suggesting in this video? No. The verse was revealed because the Muslims were trying to be friends with some Jews or some pagans or whoever the narrative is talking about. And because of their preference for being really friendly with these particular groups, they started to be influenced by this particular group. And God revealed this verse to say, hey, you might want to stop that, because it led to some issues later on, according to some of the narratives. Okay. There's Sufi tafsirs that interpret this non-literally. But of course, I mean, that's not going to help David Wood's argument to quote Sufi tafsirs about an internal esoteric reading. But the point is, there are other ways of understanding this verse. Modern day commentators, Muhammad Assad, says that this verse is saying don't imitate the behaviors of the non-believers. This would be in line with these 3 stories that are quoted by other classical tafsir scholars. Why doesn't David Wood mention those? Why? I don't know. This is a question that David Wood himself would have to answer. Now, I won't speak for David Wood, but I do know that there are Christian apologists out there, and their narrative is, we're going to paint Islam in a certain way because our hope is twofold. One, probably the secondary, is we want our already existing audience, Christians, to just listen to us and not even bother with Islam. Don't investigate it. Just take our word for it. Now, I'm not saying David Wood said that in the video. That's kind of the impression that some people might get. David Wood knows what he's talking about, right? He's got a PhD, or he's working on one. He must know what he's talking about. He knows his sources. He has done many debates. So just that's the interpretation, isn't it? That's it, right? The other reason, and this is the one that we know for sure is the bias of David Wood and people like him, is that he's hoping to show Muslims, oh no, my religion teaches me that I can't be friends with Jews, Christians, and others, because I'm supposed to be deceptive, and then I'm supposed to be harsh against non-believers. Oh no, Islam, I shouldn't be a Muslim anymore. Oh no, what should I do? Oh, Christianity. He wants to convert Muslims. to Christianity. So, having said that, it's no mistake where his bias is. Now, he goes on to say near the end of the video that he's not saying that, the average Muslim in the West, who is apparently ignorant of the religion, doesn't even know about this. Doesn't even know that this is the interpretation of these verses, let alone that it even says this. They just don't know. And then he says, but your Muslim friends, the Muslims in the West don't define what Islam teaches. The Quran and Muhammad does. Wow. Really? So, and I'm being kind of a smart ass here, I'll admit. So if that's true, then shouldn't there be like a play button on this thing? Like, shouldn't I be able to like push a play button? The Quran's just going to tell me what Islam teaches, and I don't have to talk to anybody else? Shouldn't I just be able to read a translation of the Quran without commentary and just know what Islam teaches? Shouldn't I just pick up Bukhari or any of the 9 volumes of Bukhari that I have, Sahih Muslim, just pick it up, no commentary, just read it, and that's it. Now, some religious people do that. They just read the manifest text and they think to themselves, I know what the religion teaches. But fortunately, most religions and a lot of religious people who understand a tradition of hermeneutics and understanding scripture know that's not how it works. It's much more complicated than that. Now, this pisses off a lot of people. People who want to have this one-sided narrative of, well, this is what the religion teaches, whether you're saying this is what my religion teaches or this is what their religion teaches. It's very easy just to quote some verses. Maybe you'll quote one secondary source. You might even quote Tafsir ibn Kathir or Bukhari and say, that's it. But is that really it? No, it's not. If that were true, then why would you have a book like the one I have here? Why would Abdul Yusuf Ali waste his time with 6,000 points of commentary? Why? Because religion operates this way. It might be annoying. It might be really complicated. I remember when I was a Muslim talking to an atheist friend of mine about Jewish interpretation of the violent passages in the Old Testament. And it was like the Battle of Jericho. And this is just a quick aside, I assure you. Battle of Jericho, Israelites slaughtered a whole bunch of people. And my friend was like, that's terrible. Why? Who would, you read that and how do you get around that? Or how could you get around that? And I said, well, Jews in their tradition, they interpret the Bible with 4 levels of interpretation. The literal is just the top layer. There's the 3 below that. And he's kind of looked at me and he was like, I don't know about that. And I kind of looked at him and went, what do you mean you don't know about that? And he just said, he really felt like it was a mental gymnastic. Like, oh, I don't like what the literal interpretation says, so I'm going to scurry away from it and come up with these other interpretations. Now, you don't have to agree that religions have other ways of approaching their text. You don't have to. If you like making fun of the Song of Songs, Song of Solomon, right? Oh, it's pornographic, right? The literal manifest text might look that way, but Christians, historians, and scholars from origin onward have made it clear that the Song of Solomon can, and usually is, according to these scholars, interpreted esoterically. Now, you might be scratching your head going, esoterically? What the hell? I'm just reading it for what it says. And you might not like it. You might be like, I don't agree with it. I just want to read it for what it says. Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion has gone so far as to say, sophisticated theologians say there's different ways of interpreting things. I don't really understand it. Cool. Glad you've admitted your limitation, but there are many religious people and spiritual people who look beyond the literal text. Not only that, they go to other interpretations. Why is this important? Because I would be willing to put money on many Muslims who just pick up the Quran themselves and they go, I wonder what my opinion is of this text. They have their own way of reading it. They look at other commentators beyond Ibn Kathir. They'll understand the historical context. Now, have Muslims just invented this? Have they just invented this interpretation of chapter 3, verse 28, where I mentioned the historical episode? No, because even up to the 21st century, ladies and gentlemen, the study Quran, which was published by a team of Muslim scholars, I don't own it. You better believe I'm going to be buying it. But go on Amazon right now. Go ahead. I'll wait. Oh, you're back. Okay, good. So if you're on Amazon right now, they have a preview. where you can look and see. Go to the commentary for chapter 3, verse 28. And if you do that, the same 3 historical episodes I mentioned that these classical commentators that aren't Ibn Kathir, that they quote to show the historical context of chapter 3, verse 28, guess what? Those same narratives are in the study Quran. 21st century scholarship. Why is that important? Because we understand the historical context, and it's not this narrative that David Wood imposes on the text in his video, where he says Muslims are allowed to be deceptive towards non-believers so that when the time is right, they can strike. I think that's a really dangerous interpretation. Now, I would be disingenuous. Let me be very clear here. Are there Muslims out there that probably do interpret the verses that way? Yeah, they probably are. I'm sure ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Muslims that the groups that are Islamic, that are Muslims, the extremists, right? Conservative, ultra-conservative Muslims. For all I know, there could be some Muslim father down the street that tells his children, don't go playing with the Christian boys and girls because the Quran says. I'm sure that there are Muslims who do actually follow the line of reasoning that David Wood proposes in his video. I'm making this video for 2 reasons. One, because I know Muslims personally who don't. Okay, I was a Muslim myself. I never did. The Muslims I talked to never did, online and in real life. The imams I spoke to, the Muslim scholars I had the privilege of talking to in person, who are from other countries, never interpreted the verses this way. So it's not that I'm saying which interpretation is right or wrong. It's a question of how are Muslims in the 21st century interpreting this text? And granted, there are some who probably are extreme in their interpretation, who would watch David's video and been like, duh, of course. We don't want to be friends with non-believers because we're more powerful than them. They have this supremacist attitude. I'm sure there are Muslims. I'm sure right now, after you're done watching this video, you could go on YouTube and find videos where conservative Salafi or conservative Sunni or conservative Shia Muslims say, oh yeah, we don't want to be friends with non-believers. And maybe they'll invoke the verses that David Wood quoted in his video. Maybe. But are there other commentaries out there that suggest a different narrative? Are there Muslims out there that don't buy into the narrative that David Wood has proposed in his video? Yes. And that's the thing that needs to be remembered. As I said in my blog post, I don't really mind what David's doing in terms of, I understand what his bias is. He's trying to convert Muslims to Christianity, and he's going to do anything he can to paint Islam in a certain picture so that he can cause Muslims to have cognitive dissonance, to be like, oh no, I need Jesus. Okay, he wants that to happen. But for myself personally, as an ex-Muslim, I'm still a huge theology and religious studies nerd. And when I see someone who does this, I'm scratching my head going, wait, there's more to this story. How come that's not being discussed? How come that's not being mentioned? I mean, if David had made the video and said, and this is where I'll end on this, if David had made the video saying, if Muslims believe this, I find this problematic, right? If there are Muslims out there who actually follow this narrative, this train of thought, and interpret the Quran this way, I have an issue with that. I would have been like, yeah, yes, we should have an issue with that interpretation. But what about all the Muslims who watched that video and went, I don't do that? What do you do? Well, for David Wood, you certainly haven't won any converts. Anyway, kind of turned into a rant. Hope you enjoyed watching it. Hopefully in the near future, I will have more Dreaming in Symbols podcasts ready to go, and hopefully have some live guests. Yeah, hopefully this was food for thought. And hopefully this will remind us that there is complexity, there is nuance when understanding the sacred text of all religions, not just Islam, not just Christianity, and that we shouldn't forget that in light of whatever biases we might have personally. Thank you all for watching, and peace be with you all.